really go far deeper to apply any stuff as well. So that's the reason whatever is required at a glance to understand these concepts, I'll just explain those concepts. So I'm going to go anyway. I have share the codes, so only the codes I'm going to share. These are all just for an explanation purpose, as an augmentation to the code. That's all. Any other doubt?
No, sir. Thank you.
But can anyone tell, or coordinators tell, what has been covered? I mean, has anything been talked about linear regression, logistic regression, and so on?
No, sir.
Okay. Uh, yeah. So in machine learning, linear regression is one of the most fundamental uh, algorithms. In fact, this pre-existed what we call machine learning today. It's more than a century old least squares technique, whatever was developed. So that is the basis for linear regression. I have just shown to make it much easier, especially for people who are very new to these concepts. So I have shown an example here. So what we have is sort of an electrical circuit with a resistor, and there is an voltmeter. I mean, there are two measuring instruments over here, voltage reading and then current reading. So if you are going to log it, suppose basically you're going to do two measurements. One is voltage measurement and another is current measurement. And you would over a period of time. So if you're sampling your reading and then taking it, and this is how you would see the readings to be. And if you're going to plot current versus voltage, this readings would be spread out something like this. Each dot is one particular reading which is there. So as you increase the voltage, or as you increase so one resistor is fixed. So then this is what you see, a relation between voltage and current. And suppose somebody is very novice to this. Suppose you understand, you go back centuries ago, and this Ohm's law itself was not found out. So then, how did Ohm's come up with this thing? Or if in the modern day, if somebody had to reinvent Ohm's law, how would they do it? So this sort of an experiment is what anyone would do. They would correct voltage and current, and they want to find how the voltage and current are related. I have given a sample of readings over here. So each one is one sample of reading. So like that you have n number of readings which are there. In this case, 100 readings are there of voltage and current measurements. This is how it looks. Now, uh, in a simple Excel tool also, if you're going to plot this thing, and then you say fit a trend, so it's almost going to fit you. I mean, you can choose multiple options there. So it could fit you a line, or it could fit a curve, or whatever it is. You're going to do some sort of fitting. So this process where you're going to fit one line through your data is what you can say in another way of looking at linear regression. But how best that you're putting that line across the data is what makes it a particular algorithm called the linear regression. So linear regression is based on the least square principle. And so essentially you are trying to fit the data with a model like this. So your output readings, this is f of x, is depends on your input variable x. Okay, so if voltage and current are there, so you can assume current is your input and voltage is your output, or any other way, vice versa. So you can make a certain assumption over there. Then there is something called yeah. So alpha naught term is there, bias term is there, and there is a slope. Alpha 1 is the slope, and x. This is the simplest linear equation. Okay, so now the question is, we know that the voltage and current could be having, means if you just look at this data itself, you can assume that there is some sort of linear relationship. As the voltage increases, current also increases. So this sort of understanding will be you have, but then how do you sort of make it into a model? So you're going to initially assume a linear model. So linear model is of the term where you intercept or the bias term, and you have a slope and you have a variable. So this is how you would like to fit. But the question now is, what is alpha naught and what is alpha 1? So this is where the answer to these questions is is what leads you into the linear regression or the least square fit. So for that, what we are going to do is that we are going to assume certain initial values for the intercept and the slope. In machine learning terminology, intercept is nothing but a bias. So bias and the slope, you're going to assume some initial values, and you're going to get for a given current or a given voltage, you will get some current. Okay. So and then what you say, the first reading is 17.22 and 2.11. So in this one, if you're going to say voltage is your input, so you're going to assume some alpha naught, some alpha 1 times 17.22, and you're going to get some value for fx which is equivalent to current. Okay, but then this value may not be 2.1 because you are not very sure about these alpha naught and alpha 1 numbers. You have just initialized it randomly. So in such a case, there will be a difference between the actual measurement and whatever your model is predicting. So this difference is what is known as the residue. So residue is f of x is your predicted value and y is your actual output value. So this difference is the residue or the error. You take, you have one measurement, but for that you have taken one error. But for 100 measurements, how are you going to calculate it? So you're going to use something called residual sum of squares, where you're going to square the error for each measurement. So each error is difference between the actual value and the predicted value. Predicted value is coming from your assumed model and the coefficients that you have given to it. Okay, so when you do this, this is known as the RSS term, residual sum of squares term. And the whole idea is how do you arrive at alpha naught and alpha 1 is whatever minimizes this residual sum of square errors. So is what will give you the desired alpha naught and alpha 1. So f of x, fx minus y, the whole square is nothing but RSS. So the k or the cost function is nothing but the residual sum of squares error, and you have to reduce that error by continuously changing alpha naught and alpha 1. When you do that, if you're going to plot this cost function or RSS or whatever you call that term versus any of your coefficients. So now suppose I'm only going to take the slope term here. So I want to comparing this cost function or the residual sum of squares with one of the slopes. Okay, so I started my assuming alpha 1 to be somewhere here. Okay, and then slowly I have to change in such a way that this k is reduced, which means the k comes to a minimum. So when I do that, when k comes to the minimum, then the alpha 1 value which makes k or the cost function to be the minimum is my final calculated value for my slope. Similarly, you can do it for alpha naught as well. So this process of finding out the coefficients uh, by reducing the cost function is nothing but what is known as the optimization. So in the optimization strategy, you are going to minimize the cost function, which is a function of, in the case of the simple linear model, with one variable. So we are only taking one variable. So this is a linear model with a single variable. Eventually we are going to call it as linear regression with single variable. So for such a model, we set up a optimization problem, and from the optimization problem, we are going to arrive at the alpha naught and alpha 1 values, which minimizes the cost function. So this optimization, how we are going to do is typically the widely prevalent method is the gradient descent. So gradient descent, so what is the gradient? So you have a cost function, so the slope of that cost function has to keep on decreasing. So this is how you do. So you started here, and then eventually you sort of use a gradient descent algorithm to identify the next value of alpha naught and alpha 1, and then keep on going until it reaches the minimum. Okay, so optimization, and especially within that, the gradient descent algorithm is going to minimize your cost function and give you the final values for alpha naught and alpha 1, which can fit you the curve for your given data. So now the same data which was there, if I'm going to change alpha naught and alpha 1, say I initially assumed some value of alpha naught to alpha 1 for which I got a straight line fit. I know this is not right. As you start using the gradient descent algorithm for the optimization, so eventually you start getting lines which are having some slope and some intercept, and finally you will arrive at a line which is sort of a best fit line to your given data. So, and finally you have achieved your objective of fitting a model to your given data. And then that particular best fit line, if you draw perpendiculars from each data point to that best fit line, then what essentially we are talking about is that this error squared for each term, which is this distance, whatever is there from the point to the line. So this is the error. So this sum of square of this error would be the minimum when you sort of do a gradient descent algorithm and then find this line. So succinctly, this is what everything it's about the linear regression algorithm. Of course, you can do in a more mathematical way as well. So using the matrix methods, the eigenvalue and such other methods are there. But typically, in a large data context, this gradient descent algorithm works out quite well. Okay, so yeah, so if you want to represent it mathematically instead of the gradient descent algorithm, so you will get in one shot what is alpha 1 and what is alpha naught. So this is this is the formula for getting alpha 1 and alpha naught in a mathematical sense, not which is not the just now what I explained the gradient descent. Instead of that, if you want to use the mathematical way, this is how you would do and get alpha naught and alpha 1. So I'll not go too much into intricacies, but in the machine learning community, so this is more prevalent, and it has its own reasons of why people just don't use the norm methods, normal function methods to identify. They will use the gradient descent algorithm instead. So how can you put gradient? What you're telling is initially you have chosen an initial value of alpha naught and alpha 1, and then every time you need to reduce this alpha naught value or so do a correction to this alpha naught value. What you do is that you take the gradient of the cost function and multiply it with a factor. Okay, so this factor is very important. This factor is known as the learning rate. Okay, so this learning rate multiplies the gradient of the cost function, and this whole thing is subtracted from your current value of alpha naught to update the value of to update its value. Similarly, alpha 1 also is done. So you have to do simultaneously both of them, and then again go through the process of fitting it, finding the RSS, and coming back, so that you start getting each individual points. So this is because you are using the gradient of the cost function to arrive at these values of alpha naught and alpha 1. This is known as a gradient descent algorithm. I will try to run on video here. Let me see if it runs. Okay, so now I'll just hold this and give you the context for this. So what is happening here is the same current and voltage reading. Okay, and you assume certain alpha naught and alpha 1 initially, and that line which created alpha naught plus alpha 1 x is voltage, so then f of x is I, there is a current. So that line initially you just got some random line like this, which is nowhere related to the data which you are having. Okay, and if you're going to plot this in a three-dimensional plot where k is the cost function or residual sum of square errors, and the alpha naught and alpha 1, so alpha naught is given a naught and alpha 1 is a1. Okay, this is how a three-dimensional surface of alpha naught, alpha 1 and cost function will look like. So if you change the alpha naught and alpha 1, how the k changes, so is what is given by this surface. And for this particular line, right now our point is here. Okay, so for the given alpha naught, alpha 1 and cost function, the cost function is somewhere here. Our idea is to minimize this cost function so that it becomes 0. So that as you change alpha naught and alpha 1, you can observe here how the cost function changes. Are you able to see this video right now, everybody? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's visible, sir.
Okay. I don't know. So there is some background noise, so just bear with it. So now you see the line changing, the point changing. So alpha naught and alpha 1 will keep changing, and see now it's more or less, it has come to the middle. You are not able to see that point. So it had a best fit line, and if you still keep changing alpha naught and alpha 1, you will see that the line, you see the point is now here, it is way off now. Okay, so when the cost function is minimized, then the alpha naught and alpha 1 will give you the best fit line to this curve. This is sort of an intuitive explanation to your understanding of what gradient descent algorithm is and how it identifies the coefficients, which sort of gives you the best fit line. Okay, so finally what we have done, so what eventually it is going to give us is the alpha naught alpha 1 is that it's going to give basically V equal to IR equation. So we have the Ohm's law by doing an experiment and using machine learning data analytics to fit our model through the least square method gradient descent algorithm. So there cannot be a much more simpler explanation to a linear regression problem. So of course it's more mathematical, a lot of things are involved, but intuitively this is what is linear regression algorithm. Okay, so the next thing, you have used linear regression algorithm, you have used a very simplistic model here. You are not used any square terms V. A linear power of your independent variable. The independent variable is variable. So in such a model, you are going to get, so you need to analyze how good is your model. So always see, the first process is that you identify certain model for your data, then you compute the cost function, then you compute the final your coefficients of your model through a gradient descent algorithm. And once you do that and you have finalized your alpha naught and alpha 1, you will still have an error. Okay, because you will never have a 100% fit, basically because your model might not be to that level, or your data is too scattered, and you will never have any model which will perfectly fit the data. So for such a condition, so how do you know that how good is your model? So that is where error metrics come into picture. So typically you have two error metrics. One is called the mean square error, and another thing is called the mean absolute error. So mean square error is
So how
uh,
about listed R2 and F statistics?
yeah, there are many error metrics. There is not just one or two, but these are the prominent errors that I am talking about.
Okay.
So the MSE, so MSE is defined in terms of your predicted value minus actual value, the whole square. So you sum it up and then divide by n, you get the mean square error. So mean absolute error, so only thing what you're doing is that you're not squaring it, and you're just summing over the differences. Okay, so these are also related to norms. So there is something called L1 norm, L2 norm. So these errors are also related to that. I mean, each individual error will have its own sort of consequences to the whole thing. So it depends on your application as to what error you're going to choose. And just as somebody pointed out, so it's not just mean square and mean absolute error. There are multiple other error metrics, and also it depends on the algorithm that you're working on. For that, what suits better. So if you're going to classification problem, so slightly the error metrics will be different there. So it's not exactly the mean square error, mean absolute error. It will be a different one. We'll see to it when we go to logistic regression. So this summarizes the whole concept of linear regression. Okay, so now we will take up using the Colab notebook one example, and we'll try to go through it. Okay, so I think I might need some more explanations to be given, because that was simple linear regression. So we are touching 3:30 now, so we have 1 hour. So okay, so let's see. So multiple linear regression is where you don't have just one independent variable, but you have n independent variables. That's why it's multiple. So when you extend the linear regression model, the natural extension is multiple linear regression. But what you're going to do is that you're going to keep the powers of this independent variable x's as 1. You're not going to take the power to 2, 3 or anything. So when you do that, then this model is known as multiple linear regression model. So f of x is equal to alpha naught x naught plus alpha 1 x1, alpha 2 x2, alpha m xm. So in any realistic problem, you would have multiple independent or input variables which are affecting your output. Okay, so that is the reason the multiple linear regression model is sort of more realistic model. In this case, I have taken one random example here. So it is a concrete compressive strength. So if anybody in a civil engineering lab, so they would be testing the concrete compressive strength, and that would depend on multiple things like cement, large. So sort of 8 independent parameters which are affecting our output variable, which is the concrete compressive strength. So I have, in a three-dimensional sense, I have just tried to represent two variables which are affecting it. Okay, so we will go to a more relevant model when in the Google Colab. But to explain, I have just taken this one. So here, another way, say in the last model, you saw alpha naught plus alpha 1 x. So alpha naught can also be written as alpha naught x naught when you take x naught is equal to 1. So and then it's easier for you to reframe the whole model as a matrix multiplication. So you're multiplying a row vector of the coefficients alpha. There are m coefficients, and you are multiplying it with the column vector of input values. So what are the input values? So now this cement content or slag content. So these are you will have some engineering units to it or something like that. And then so you're going to use those values. Those are the x values.
and what you don't know are these coefficients. So alpha naught through alpha n, this is what you will find out by doing a multiple linear regression. And this matrix multiplication itself can be simplified as alpha transpose x. So this is finally what your multiple linear regression model looks like. And you extend the same concepts of a single variable regression with the residues of the RSS term. So this is now going to change. Even though there are multiple input variables, it is dependent on your data. And then what is your prediction from your model versus what is the actual? So that is sum of squares, and that is what is the cost function, the way of representing that as a cost function. You apply gradient descent like before, but now you are taking the gradient descent with respect to each of your coefficients. So there you took only with respect to alpha naught and alpha n. So now it is a function of your coefficients. So the number of gradient descent steps that you're going to do, or not the steps, number of gradient descent actually that you're going to do is depends on the number of coefficients that you are having. So it's a partial, that is why it's a partial derivative. So partial derivative with respect to each of the coefficients you have to take. So then there are some other important considerations here, what is known as feature scaling. So now it's you see something is in 540, something is this is in 0, this is in 160, this is in 2. So what happens when you try to fit the model with data as it is that it's going to the coefficients are going to be sort of discriminated, in the sense that a coefficient of this value, which is in the power of 2, will have a higher weightage as compared to a coefficients with respect to something like this, at this 2.5 or 0 or something other terms. So we don't want to bias our model towards features which just have higher numeric values. So just because it has higher numerical value does not mean that this is going to have a greater influence on our output. So in order to avoid that problem, what typically is done is we are doing feature scaling, which means so we can either scale the variables into the range -1 to 1, or a popular method is also known as mean normalization, which means we subtract each value in the column, so each value here, by its mean. Then this is known as mean normalization. And one more thing which is going beyond this mean normalization also is we can divide this by its standard deviation. So xj minus mu j by standard deviation of the xj. So, and these are the ways that we sort of control how these variable ranges are, and so that they look the same to the output variable. So the coefficients which we finally get are not influenced by the absolute numeric values of the individual variable. Okay, and the second important aspect in multiple linear regression is that so we need to see if suppose two variables are highly correlated, so then probably it is not to us. So we need to look at non-interpreters, and we need to look at interaction effects. So these are quite involved things. I'm not going to discuss much over here, but for your understanding, you need to understand this stuff. And finally, it is polynomial regression. So if you extend multiple linear regression to one more level where you had higher powers of your variables, input variables, like x2 was there, so you're going to add a square term to it, it becomes x2 square. So it essentially you're creating a polynomial model here. So our polynomial will bring in the nonlinear terms to it. This is how you extend the linear regression model to nonlinear problems. Okay, so but still use all the methods that are available to you as a linear regression method, which means the RSS, the reducing the cost function, the gradient descent, everything works the same way. These nonlinear terms are only for this x's, but your coefficients are unaffected by that thing. You are just adding additional coefficients for your non-unit terms. So these are x1, x2 is known as interaction terms. So if you have multiple, if you have three variables, x1, x2, x3, then x1, x3, x2, x3, x3 square, x1 square, x2 square. So that like that you can keep on adding your model order. So I think that should suffice to take up this problem which is there. So I think everybody, I mean, you can all open up this superconductor underscore linear regression. So there are two parts to it. So I think we will first address the first part here. Part 2 is more involved. Yeah. So have everybody been able to open this file? Coordinators, let me know if there is any problem for anybody to open. I mean, we are not doing too much of hands-on here. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So unlike the NumPy thing, we may not do much hands-on here. So this is just I will just go thing, and then I'll relate how the concepts that I just now do an actual using scikit-learn, which is a modeling library in Python. So NumPy was doing for you the mathematical operations and so on, but many of these like in linear regression, whatever we studied, so now getting an error term, getting the cost function, doing gradient descent. So all these things are sort of already pre-built in this library called scikit-learn. So you don't have to go through the mathematics of it. You can just apply those functions and you're going to get the results. Okay, so that is what we will do here. This is an example of a superconductor experiment that was done. So there are 81 features. So features, variables, independent variables, they are all the same. They are x's. Okay, so there are 81 features, and there are experiments. So experiments is there are 21,263 experiments have been conducted on different superconductors. And what we are interested is that to predict the critical temperature. So typically in a machine learning problem, you have your input variables are also key one, output variables are also key one. And what you're going to do is you're going to extract the model. So that is the machine learning. So machine learning is all about finding the coefficients. I mean, assuming a model, and then for that particular model, whatever coefficients are there, or whatever related terms are there, so you have to get that. So it's not always coefficients. So that is model extraction process is nothing but machine learning. Okay, so the critical temperature is our y variable, which we want to predict. Okay, so what is the idea? So means even in the Ohm's law experiment that you saw, V is equal to IR. So you had 100 experiments, and from the 100 experiments, you arrived at a model, a linear model, which is almost like V is equal to IR. So what was your coefficient? So alpha naught, your suppose your intercept was not there. So alpha naught is equal to 0. So alpha 1 is where it's 1 over r if it is in terms of I. So V is equal to R, IR, or I is equal to 1 over R into V. So that sort of relation will come. So what you identified is nothing but the constant term on the coefficient of that model. So after 100th experiment, suppose somebody gives you, this is my voltage, say my voltage is 20 volts. So you don't have to go and do that experiment again. You just use that model that you got, which means the coefficient times the voltage. So you got the coefficient. So you just embed that value of the voltage, the new value of voltage somebody gives, and you're going to predict the current. So this is where the concept of prediction comes in machine learning, or the regression, or any of these problems. So machine learning is closely tied to prediction, because you have certain data. From that data you have learned. So what is learning here? So learning is you have learned the coefficients of the model. Okay, so that is the learning that you have done. Once you have done that learning, you throw out the data. You are not concerned with the data. You are not concerned with the experiment. You are not concerned with any of those things. You just use the model and predict given your input variables. Okay, so here also superconductor experiment was done on 21,000 cases of different experiments, and then you are going to predict you are going to learn how to predict the critical temperature from the 81 features. Then tomorrow somebody was going to come up with a new superconductor. They say this is my composition of the superconductor, and then I want to predict what its critical temperature is going to be. Then you don't have to do the experiment again. You just use your model that you generated by learning from the data that was available from 21,000 experiments, and then say this is my prediction. Okay, so that is the whole concept of machine learning. What you're going to do in machine learning is just this. And then once you predict, you also talk about error metrics, and you say that based on the model, and the data that I had, whatever I have learned has a certain possibility of error. So when you get a new value and you're going to predict the output for that using your model, you say that I'm not 100% confident about this answer. I expect that my prediction will have such and such an error. My error bounds are so and so. Okay, so this is the whole gamut of, or a crux of machine learning. You fit a model, you learn. When you learn, fit a model, predict, and then say that my prediction has this error bounds. Okay, so we will now go through it. So scikit-learn, as I told, so sklearn as it is called. So in that, we linear regression, whatever we talked about earlier, that model is directly available. So we import from linear model library a linear regression function, and we are also importing some other things. So pre-processing, we talked about feature scaling, okay, in multiple linear regression. So that is where the pre-processing function comes into help. And we talked about error metrics. This is mean absolute error and mean square error. So you don't have to code it up. So you just call these functions. It's going to give you the output. And we also are going to use pandas, numpy, and for plotting, plotly. So pandas is a data frame based, again, a library of Python, where initially to get the data and then make basic manipulations with data, you require pandas. So as I go through the thing, you may also start running it on your PCs for you to get the feel, or you can just watch my presentation. Okay, so now if you go to this folder, you also are given a CSV file. So this CSV file has got all the data that is required. Okay. Maybe I will open that thing for you to get an understanding of how the data is. I mean, I intend to cover logistic regression also, but I don't think time is possible for that. So at least let's try to cover linear regression in this session. So maybe we can continue to logistic regression in the next session. So this is the CSV file which was given. You have so many columns. So if you look at these columns, so number of elements, mean atomic mass, are so these are all related to
for that experiment for the superconductor, what are the characteristics of the superconductor? So you will have n number of variables, actually 81 variables. You're supposed to have 80 or 80. That will be there. And finally, you will have temperature, which is a critical temperature. This is your Y value, and everything before that is your X value. So many X's are there. So not just one or two, 80 X's. And how many experiments are there? So there are 21,000 experiments. So you should have the number of rows, which is equivalent to that. Okay, so it's going to take time if you scroll it. That's the data which is available in your Google Drive. Okay, so now the problem is that whatever is in Google Drive is not automated. Unlike in offline exercises where the data is there, you just call the data. You cannot do that so easily here. So that is where you mount the drive. So other in the morning I told you can go to this folder and other stuff, but this is the code where you put this code, so it will enable you to mount the drive. Okay, but the problem is that again, because of security reasons and other stuff, you cannot simply mount it. It will say go to this link. So if all of you are working on it, so you can also try this. So it will give you one link. You have to go there and get an authorization code from that link, going to your particular Google Drive, Google account. Okay. Sorry, I think I took some other account. I mean, these are the stuff that you don't have to do if you are running in Jupyter Lab on your local machine. These are things because you are running everything on a server. You need to load the data into the server, into the hard disk, which it has been allocated. So you will get this page. So Google Drive wants to access your Google account. Now you have to say hello. Then you will have this code. So you press on the link here, and this is the copy link. It gets copied, and now come here, go into this, enter your authorization code. So place your cursor there and paste, Control V, enter. So then it says mounted at content drive. Okay, so this is how you are mounting your Google Drive into a Google Colab. If you go to the folder here, earlier you saw only sample data. Now you also see Drive. So within Drive, so it will have multiple subfolders. I have many things over here. So I will go to the particular folder that I'm working on. So I have the linear regression. So here you see the CSV data. So the CSV data which was there on your drive is now has been uploaded into the Google server. Okay. So now one thing you have to do when you have to run this code is that you will not be able to run the code because my path is slightly different. So what you do, I mean, here I'm having the superconductor. So in the superconductor, so we have scon underscore data.csv. Okay. So here you can go and say copy path. So once you do that copy path, you can come here in the next line of the code. You have pd.read CSV. So pd is pandas. So pandas will do a CSV reading function is there. There you just paste the path, your particular path here. Only when you paste that particular path and then run, your you would have imported your CSV file into the variable called data. Okay, so this is one thing that you have to note when you are running your file. So you have to go to that particular folder structure, get its path and put it here, including the file name. Okay, so you actually only change this, but okay, if you're going to copy the path, it's going to copy with the .csv. You just paste that here. So now we can also read. So the pandas gives you multiple options of visualizing the data. So one thing is data.head. So head is from the beginning. I want to see 10 values of 10 experiments that were there for superconductor. So I want to see. So you say data dot head. When you have data dot head, so you will see all these things. So number of elements, mean atomic mass, so many other things are there here, including the last one, the critical temperature, and all the values are there. So this is how you can visualize whatever the data that you have using or whatever you have uploaded, and some of the statistics if you want from the data, you can use the describe function. So now this data, since we read it as a pandas data frame, so whatever is there in CSV, it has been converted into pandas data frame and stored here. So, and we can use that, it has multiple other functions. The data frame has multiple functions which we can directly call. So this is a data.describe. So when we say describe, it's going to give the count, mean, standard deviation, minimum 25th percentile, 50th percentile, 75th percentile, and the max value in these particular columns. Okay, so the number of elements are 21,263. So they correspond to your number of experiments, superconductor experiments that were there. Okay. So, and then what are the mean value of that in this number of elements? So the mean value of the number of elements is 4. Mean atomic mass is 87 and something else. So like entropy. So such other things are there. What is the standard deviation? So you can, these are known as data analysis. Exploratory data analysis or whatever is known as. So you can, before even fitting any model, so when something is very new, you need to understand it. So how do you understand it is you do this sort of stuff. Just see whatever it is directly. Then you see some of the measures which are there within that. And then you try to visualize it. So this is a code using Plotly, where the 3D scatter plot is made of critical temperatures or Y. So I have chosen some two parameters, mean atomic mass and entropy density, as X and Y, and I have plotted the relation here. So if you look at how how entropy and mean atomic mass are affecting the critical temperature, there's no way that you will identify it. It's not like the Ohm's law experiment, where it was so visible and anybody could say that you have to fit a line and the line has to go something like this. So you cannot do that here. And that too, I'm just taking two variables, but there are 80 variables which are there here. How you are going to do? So this is where the mathematical models really help us. Okay. So next thing is that we have to pre-process the data. So we talked about pre-processing earlier. So pre-processing is the normalization, so that we don't want to make certain columns more dominant than the others. So if you see here, so these are integer values, 4 or 5. So these are floating variables, 88.9 and something other thing. So the number of elements may not be given importance when fitting the model. So in order to avoid all that problems, we have to do the pre-processing. Basically, so this is where, so usually you read the data using pandas, but when you want to do some mathematical operations, you have to switch to NumPy. So the data dot to NumPy. So this is what will convert your pandas data frame into a NumPy array. Okay, and then the array shape is this. If you call the shape function, which we in the morning we talked about this thing, dot shape. So if you use dot shape, you're going to get the matrix size here. So 21263 by 82. So 21263 experiments, 82 variables. So there are actually 81 x's and 1 y. This is the critical temperature. And always here, you always have to understand that, especially in these simple algorithms, you are typically doing with single y, multiple x's, but your objective is always a single y. Okay, so then we want to now differentiate between x and y. So if you want to fit a model, you have to separate your x's and y's. How are you going to separate it? So this is one method of doing that. So your ND is a NumPy array or NumPy matrix. So in Python, -1 represents the last value. Okay, so you have, this is a two-dimensional matrix. So I want all the rows, but I only want to, I want to pick everything except the last column. So colon -1 will give you from the first column, which is index 0, up to the n-1th column, where n is the last column. So that colon -1 is going to extract out all the x variables. And now if you take the shape of that, you're going to get 21263 by 81. So you have left out the critical temperature column, and you have put every other columns into the new variable called x. And now if you have to separate out from the original matrix, you have to separate out the y. So for y, instead you just drop this colon here and just say -1. So we also talked about how you pick up sub arrays from a big array in the morning session. So this is how we do. So we only want to pick the last column, which is -1. So and then we want to call that as y. Okay. So now if you want to print the shape of it, so this is what it is. This is 21263. So it's not going to show you one. Again, these are some tricks in Python. So you can force it to make one. So there are other methods to do that as well. Okay. So then once you have separated x and y, so this is the basic thing that you're going to do. So from your data, you're going to separate all the x's and all the y's, x's from the y. Okay. So then you are going to do the scaling. So scaling, what we talked about earlier, we can do it with a simple variable called scale, function called scale. We have to use pre-processing. We have already imported this variable called pre-processing here. Function called pre-processing. So we call it function, and it has got a scale, has another function for it. The library or the class, it has got a scale as a function. So pre-processing dot scale, and we are going to scale all the x variables. And once you do scale it, if you print it, the original data is transformed into a scaled method, scaled values. Okay. So the next process after pre-processing. So the first step you did was to extract the data from a CSV file. Then you sort of visualize the data. Then you did a pre-processing of the data. Pre-processing is separating x from the y. Then you also did the scaling. So after doing all that stuff, we come to the actual linear regression fitting. Okay, so there you just call the linear regression which you already imported from the sklearn library, linear models library. So that you call it as a function. It has got a fit function associated with it. So you say fit x is your input matrix, y is output column. So linear regression dot fit xy, and you're going to give that into a variable called reg. Okay, so if you do that, so already your fit is over. So in a single line, your fit is done. I have not run before this one, so let me try to run. So now I'll just use a run before, so that everything until this particular cell is running. So it has run. Now I can run this. Okay, so now that is done. So after you have fit the thing, you need to predict. So you use the reg. So you have imported the fit model is now called reg. So reg.predict. So predict function which is there. You use the reg.predict and give the x. You are now right now giving the same x's. You can give different x, but I'm just giving back the same x's, and I'm asking what is y predict. So what is my predicted y? So what is my y? Y is nothing but the critical temperatures. These are all about critical temperatures. Okay. And then in a multiple linear regression model, so you have like 81 variables are there. So you should have 81 coefficients. And so these coefficients can be extracted using reg.coef_. So if you use this
thing, you will extract all the coefficients for each one of the variables. Okay, so your y is equal to minus 3.00, this is intercept term, plus 8.4, it raised to minus 1, which is another one, 0.84 times the first variable x1 minus 0.9 times x2, so on, so on, so on, so on. So 81 variables are there, and that is how your multiple linear regression model will look like. And okay, I think they have differentiated the coefficients in the intercept. So the intercept term can be extracted from dot intercept function. So you have minus 20 as an intercept plus this is minus 3.4 x1, 0.84 x2, so on and so forth. So you did the prediction, but then what is the error metric? How good is your prediction? So this is the last part of it. So model fitting and prediction, getting the coefficients. Okay, so this getting the coefficients is something that you are doing for your own understanding. You don't have to do it, because what primarily you are going to do is you're going to do the prediction. So that once the prediction is done, you need to know how good is your prediction. You can call the mean absolute error and mean square error functions here. Okay. So once you do that, you can get how good or bad is your prediction. So now for the 20,000 readings or whatever that the number of readings are there. So for all those readings, the mean absolute error is 13 and the mean square error is 308. Okay, so these are not great numbers actually. So this model is not that great. It's a very basic model, but it is still able to predict and give us the critical temperature given only the x variables. Okay, so that's about the error metric. And now we need to understand how we improve this particular model. What are the ways that we can improve the this model? So anybody, any questions here until this point? You can also run and see for yourself whether it's working. Any doubts? Anything in the chat window? Am I still audible?
Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, in just 10 or 15 minutes, so you have been able to actually implement a multiple linear regression model using scikit-learn library of Python. So, this is the first fundamental step in machine learning. Okay. So now given these errors, which we say is not that good, okay, so we want to improve it. So any ideas anybody as to how we could improve this model? See, what we did is we gave the training, we did the training, okay. So, and then we are predicting how good it is by putting back the training variables. Okay, that is not the ideal thing. You have used, you know the 20,000 experiments, you fit a model, and again you give back the same axis and you want to predict. So this can be very misleading. So that is where you typically have to differentiate between training set and testing set in machine learning. So if you have 21,000 variables, you usually say you keep away 10% or 20% of that out. Okay, and split your data into a training set and a test set, a small test set and a fairly large training set. and you use certain methods called cross-validation and other things to sort of verify that whether the model that you have chosen is good enough or not. Okay, that is what we are going to now sort of try to understand in the next steps. You did a basic linear regression, multiple linear regression model. You got some error metrics, but that's not a true picture of even these errors are not a true picture of the realistic condition, because you have not given an unseen data to it. You are again predicting the errors from the seen data only, whatever model has already seen. So that's the reason we want to improve it, or we want to make we want to have much more clarity on our error metrics, and we use this training, testing, and cross-validation methods. So again, in model selection, scikit-learn, sklearn, so you have train, test, split. So this function is there where automatically you can split your data into training portion and test portion. And probably your linear regression, multiple linear regression model is not sufficient. So you are not capturing the non-linearities that are there. As y is related to some non-linear features of your x's, square terms, cube terms, and so on. So we call the polynomial features function there. There is something called pipeline. We will understand what it is. And the cross-validation and cross-validation score. So that's also something that we will understand, and we're going to try and do that in this step. Okay, so now x train, x test, y train, y test. So you have to split both your x variables and the y variables into training and test set. Okay, so that train test split you call with x, y, and test size is 0.3. So what it means is that it's going to take out 30% of the 21,000 experiment out and then keep it aside. So only with the 70% of the data, you are going to do a model fitting. So 30% of the data is not used for your model fitting. So you are going to use that as a genuine way of testing your model to know how good is your model. So the splitting is done, then you do scaling. So whatever we used the scaling earlier, so we can sort of use another function here, something called standard scaler. Okay, so and then you can scale both the train and the test set using the standard scaler, scalar.transform. So the idea of using this thing is that you can use the same scaling strategy both for training test, the training set, and the test set. So scalar.transform. So you don't have to worry too much about it. So once you go far deeper into this process, you will understand multiple aspects of it. And then we are going to call the linear regression, but this time instead of x and y, we say scale training variables only, and the y training variables only. So on 70% of the original data only, we are going to do a linear regression. Okay, so we have done that, and now we want to say what is the error with respect to training set. So we are going to predict it, and also with respect to test set. Okay, so the training set and test set usually should have different errors, and typically the test errors will be higher than the training error. But it all depends on the particular data that you have chosen and then how it goes. So you are seeing here approximately close training and test errors. But so 308. So what was our original? So that was also around the same. And what are we calling here? We are calling the mean squared error, not the mean absolute error. So we're calling the mean squared error. So now we want to improve this. So okay, so now for all practical purposes, we are more interested in test error. So training error is not relevant. Test error is what we are focusing on, and we want to reduce this test error. Okay, so that is the whole idea of doing it.
So how we could do is that we could add polynomial features, means higher degree terms. So np.a range, we talked about this in the morning session. So we suppose I am allowed the freedom to use up to 9th or 10th degree polynomial to that model. Means 81 features, and each of the features is having terms up to the 10th degree. So imagine the size of the model, a huge model. Okay, so and then what, in a for loop I'm calling it. So each time I'm calling 1 degree at a time, and instead of linear regression I'm using another model called polynomial features. Okay, so okay, that is stored in the variable called polynomial features with the degree that we want. And linear regression model, we are just capturing it in a variable, and we are eventually creating a pipeline. So pipeline is all the steps put together, your pre-processing, which is scaling, then the degree that you want to add to your model, then what is your actual model, that is your linear regression model. Okay, so this everything is stored in a pipeline. So if you call pipeline, so one after the other, these steps are conducted automatically for you. You don't have to do one at a time. So they are automatically, everything is there. So instead of linear regression dot fit, I will call pipeline dot fit. So it first scales data, then gives the particular degree that is coming in, first degree, second degree, or third degree, and then fits a linear regression model to that polynomial model. Okay, so this is on doing on XTrain, MyTrain. So always model fitting is on training data, and I'm also going to predict what is my training values. So pipeline dot predict. So I can give the XTrain values. So that is the training prediction. And what is the training error? So mean absolute error of the training. And I have multiple degrees coming in here. So I will create an array, and I will gather for each degree of the polynomial what was my mean absolute error. I will keep on collecting it. And similarly, I repeat the whole step for the test. So with the pipeline to predict with the test thing, the test error, and I will capture all the test error metrics. So I probably will not run them because it may take sufficient time with the 10 degree of polynomial. You can try that yourself. And then I'm going to plot that. Okay, I'm going to plot the error, how it looks like. So mean absolute error versus polynomial degree. Since it's going to take a lot of time, so I'm able to plot only up to the first degree or second degree. So you see the training error dropping drastically down by just from linear model to the second degree model. The training error has reduced. Okay, and but the test error is not the same. So even though initially we set the training and test error are almost the same, but as you are starting to increase things, you see that there is a significant difference between training error and test error. Test error is typically higher than training error. So this is a true condition, because this data, whatever data we are test which is there, which are feeding into the model, that data the model has never seen. So this is a realistic expectation of your model. So the training error is not a realistic expectation of your model, but a test error is a realistic expectation of how good your model is. So then I have just summarized the whole process of how it would look like. So the training error will typically drop with the polynomial degree and the error metric which is there. So with a very low polynomial degree, so the error is high. And as you keep on increasing the polynomial degree, it goes down and eventually asymptotes out. So this is how the training error would look like. So whether it is mean absolute error or mean square error, so you will get this sort of a curve. But the test error, initially, though it might be close, so eventually it starts to reduce much lesser than the training error. Then it bottoms out and then again rises. So this is the most important feature of test errors. Okay, so the point where the test error minimizes is your ideal polynomial degree. That is how you choose as to how the complexity of your model. So you don't know what order of your model is the best model.
You cannot know it from a training error. You always have to know it from the test error when the test error bottoms out. So this point is known as the trade-off point, and anything left of that, your model has high bias. Anything to the right of this, your model has high variance. What is high bias? So if you have y and x, I'm just taking one single variable here to explain. So what happens? So uh, your your model is linear model, but it looks like your data is a bit non-linear. Okay, so you have a too simplistic model, and you're not able to fit your model well to your data. So such an error is known as the high bias error. On the other hand, in the extreme end, if you come to this extreme end or and this zone, so your model, your polynomial degree has increased. So because of which you are able to fit the data so perfectly. Okay, your data fitting to your training set is very perfect. Though it is perfect, and that is what is reflected in the training error, the test error is increased. Basically, because this is what we known as this is the phenomenon known as overfitting. We have overfit our training model so that any new data comes, then that data is which we call typically in the test, which is the unseen data, it will start to see an error which is higher. So this is an underfitting or high bias problem. This is an overfitting or a high variance problem. Okay, so you need to do this training and test, and then uh, identify that what is the optimum level of polynomial degree or model complexity, and that is your trade-off point. And this is how you at your trade-off point will go. It's not going and matching every data, unlike here, nor it is like a simple straight line which is missing and having high errors at some points. So it is fairly a advanced model with higher degree, and uh, it's not too complex so that it becomes too wiggly. So this sort of a model only will give you the best result that you are expecting. Okay, so just in this entire example, we have gone through from a simple multiple linear regression model to understanding what is the error, what is the training versus a test error, how can we improve by increasing the model complexity, and you cannot simply arbitrarily improve the model complexity because you have to look at something called the bias variance trade-off. So all these aspects now we have understood with this simple superconductor experiment example. Okay, so I think yeah, so that is one thing, and then further you can improve this. Okay, so there are something called regression technique, ridge regression and lasso, or some techniques where you had 81 coefficients here just for the linear regression model. Okay, now you think of adding 10th degree polynomial, you can't even imagine what will be the number of coefficients over here. Means they will keep on rising to the power of the polynomial degree. So it's a hugely complex model, and maybe not all of them are relevant. Okay, so you need to understand that if the coefficients values are too small, like minus 0.3 over here, something could be even lesser than that. So those particular coefficients are not contributing to the model. So you need to throw them away. So how do you throw them? Can you go and manually verify this is -4, this is -3, I will remove this, I'll remove this, this -5, I'll remove this? No. There are again algorithms and automated methods which are there available, which will do this particular exercise for you of throwing away unnecessary coefficients and making the model simpler. And making it simpler, also you can train it better and eventually make it predict better. That is what we can see in the eventual things. I want to see that whether I'm talking about ridge regression. Yeah, so for this I need to again go back to
explaining a certain stuff. So there's regression and the lasso. So before that, what I will do is I'll just try to cover in this. So this is part 2 of the superconductor code. So here again, I have mounted the same thing. All the initial things are there, pre-processing and all that stuff. Okay, but now of the 81 features, probably I will do a feature engineering in a slightly different way, which means I will try to reduce the number of X variables itself. Okay, how can I do that? So principal component analysis is one method, which it's actually an unsupervised technique as well, which will allow us to reduce the number of independent variables. So from 81, I want to reduce it to something more manageable so that I can fit a higher degree polynomials as well to it without compromising much on or without losing much of my information. So of the 81 variables that were over here, so we don't know how much is relevant. There could be a lot of correlation between individual columns. So when there are dependency between individual columns, they are not adding sufficient information for our prediction. So by doing the principal component analysis, we are sort of condensing the information to only relevant information. Okay, so that's one of the important techniques which is there. So I have done the training and test split and all the stuff, and then I even scaled it. So it is important before you apply principal component analysis, you do this as well. So this principal component analysis technique, I'm not going to explain much over here. So it takes its own sort of time frame and understanding to go through it. So now I'm just using it as a tool to explain the concept of linear regression. So I just call this PCA as a function. So the PCA has been imported already here. Okay, so this pre-processing mean absolute error, and then where am I importing PCA? Yeah, I'm importing here. So the decomposition. So it belongs to sklearn decomposition. So there is PCA. So I have imported it. So this PCA I'm going to call and PCA fit, and this automatically is going to give me a certain number of values. So we have 81 variables.
So I have a query.
Yeah.
Is there any thumb rule for the test train ratio? Train test ratio?
It depends on your data size. So if you are having millions of data set, like we had 21,000 in our example, 21,000. So then if you are going to take away too much into the test set, your model fitting might not be correct. So at such circumstances, so what do you do? So I mean, around 10% is quite ideal. See, there are actually even 3 splits: train, test, and validation set. So train, validation, and test set. When you are doing that, typically the split is 80, 10, 10. Okay, and suppose you don't have the validation set, you can do 80, 20. But if your data size is huge, you don't have to do 20 and all. You can do 90, 10. So it depends on your data, and it's an experiment that you have to do. So otherwise, you will never know what is the right answer. But the general thumb rules are these things only: 80-20 or 80-10-10 or 90-10 based on the size of the data. Is it fine?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now in the PCA, so how do you know how many components to keep? So PCA just is a projection technique. So it's going to project your entire multi-dimensional data into a lower dimensional data, so a lower dimensional space. So when you are going to do that thing, what is the number of lower dimensions that you want to retain is a big question. So then for that question, so you need to answer how much of variance of the data is explained
by one component, how much of variance is explained by two components, how much of variance is explained by three components. So if you look at it, typically 95% plus. So is what is required. If you are able to explain 95% of more variance, you can retain so many components, which means in our case, we can retain three components, three dimensions. So you have 81 dimensions, but if you project that onto three dimensions as per it's an orthogonal dimension. So if you're going to project it, then those three dimensions can sufficiently explain the variance in our output variable. Okay, so that is how you decide, and automatically, so greater than 95% of the variance is explained by first three principal components. Each principal components are orthogonal to one another. Okay, they are mutually perpendicular. So we can discard all the rest of the things. And what happens in a projection is that we don't have the original data, they are the projected data. So instead of 81 original data, I have three projected data variables which I finally retain to do my prediction. Okay, so that's what PCA has done. It has reduced my burden. Okay, once it has reduced my burden, what I was having a lot of difficulty earlier in doing a polynomial regression of higher and higher order, now I can do it much more easily because I don't have to take the 10th order polynomial on an 81st variable. Okay, so I just have to go up to the third variable, and then I can take the polynomial, so that the whole of my computation becomes much more simpler. And I am not compromising much because my data is still able to explain my output. The three variables that I finally chose, the reduced variables, they are still able to explain my component, my output. So they are sufficient. But what's going to happen eventually is that when you're going to do a prediction, it's not a prediction in terms of mean atomic mass or entropy or something like that. This is completely new variable which has no meaning. So it is just an amalgamation of different variables. Okay, so you actually lose there in the sense that you have gained on the computational time, you have reduced your model complexity, but you might lose out on the stuff related to your interpretation. So how are you going to interpret your results? You will lose the information of interpretation. Okay, so now if I am going to do that, what I was not able to run that earlier using simple CPUs. So now after doing a PCA reduction, you see the mean squared error. So from 10 raised to 2, 6 and 10 raised to 2, it's dropping. So the blue curve is a training curve. It continuously drops. Okay, and then if I go further, it asymptote out. But my test error, it seems to be also dropping, but now starts diverging and then suddenly starts raising. Okay, so now this is the threshold point. Okay, the trade-off point. So at this trade-off point, you will see that sort of error peaking. So the training, underfitting, overfitting, and all these concepts. So now you are able to better appreciate it with the aspect when you have reduced your dimension through the PCA. Okay, so I think this is what time will permit us today. We will continue with the ridge regression, lasso, and probably logistic regression tomorrow. You can all run these things, and also I've given in the NumPy one assignment. So an assignment code also is there. So I think you can try it out during this 3 or 4 days of the time which is available.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we? Yeah. Thank you all participants. So we shall meet tomorrow at 9:30 for Dr. Arul sir's presentation. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.